Hello folks, welcome to a new half term of RE. And this half term we are going to be doing churches. We are looking at what happens inside a church, we're looking at what churches look like, we're looking at churches near where we live here in London. So it should be a really interesting half term. To start with, if you have your booklet, I would like you to do this on the first page of your booklet where there's a big blank page. If you don't, just do this on a piece of blank paper. We are going to do this. We're going to have a go at drawing a church. Now, the whole point of this is that we haven't talked about churches, we haven't looked at churches. I would just like to know, what do you think a church looks like? So the only instruction I'm going to give you is draw a church. Go. I'm not going to sit here. You need to pause the video and then do it. So, okay. Excellent. Okay, have a look at the church of the person next to you. We can't do that, can we? Because we're not in school. But let's have a look at some of these churches instead. These are real churches around the world. And you can tell me whether you think that your church looks like any of these. Does it have a big tower like the church here in Suffolk at St Peter's in Eye? Does it look like the big church near us here at school, St George the Martyr in Borough, that has a tower with a steeple on top? Maybe it looks like St Peter's Basilica here in Rome, which is the home of the Roman Catholic Church. That looks a little bit like St Paul's Cathedral with a big dome on top rather than a tower or a steeple. It probably doesn't look like the Roman Catholic Cathedral in Liverpool, which is a very modern church. It probably doesn't look like the New Wine Church here in Woolwich, which I wonder if you know what that used to be. Yeah, that was a cinema not too long ago. And finally, this is near where I live here in Essex. This is St Peter on the Wall Church in Bradwell. I wonder whether your church looks anything like those. I'd love to see some pictures of just what you thought a church looked like straight off the bat. So these are all lots of different churches. Now, what are some of the similarities and differences we can see? Tell me a similarity between these. Mostly, they're fairly big buildings. I mean, apart from St Peter's on the wall, they're fairly big buildings. They have windows. They tend to be quite tall. The differences are probably easier. I mean, there are some new churches, some that are very old. The one in Essex, that's over 1,000 years old, whereas this one in Liverpool is under 100 years old. They are different shapes, different sizes, different architectural styles. Remember that term. We're going to look at that now. We're going to look at some architectural styles, okay? So churches normally have a tall element to them that points up to the sky, acts as a landmark for the community around. In most towns, villages and cities, it's really easy to see where the church is. If you think about walking along past Borough Tube Station, you can see that church on the street corner. It's a really big landmark. If you think of coming out of Elephant and Castle Shopping Centre when it was still open, you can see the Metropolitan Tabernacle. If you cross over the Millennium Bridge, you'll see St Paul's Cathedral is there. It's a really big landmark. Sometimes the tower will also hang bells, which can be rung in celebration or to alert people to a warning like a fire or bombing. So when in World War II our area here in Southwark was bombed, they would ring the church bells to let people know that they had to go inside and that they had to stay safe. In the olden days, back hundreds of years ago, if there was a fire or a flood, they would use the church bells to ring. Nowadays we hear church bells if there's a wedding or a celebration or baptism. Churches will often show symbols which show that it is a special Christian building. A cross reminds Christians of Jesus and the crucifixion. So here on the church in Liverpool, there is a cross, and the cross is the most common Christian symbol. So wherever you see a cross like that, it reminds Christians of Jesus and the story of Easter. Mosaics, sculptures. So mosaics are made up of lots of little tiles. Sculptures, carvings, and pictures of Jesus, saints and angels all indicate this is a Christian church. This is Westminster Cathedral, and you can see above the door is a mosaic of Jesus and some saints as well. And saints are very important people in the Christian church. So we've got saints there. Then here we've got a sculpture of an angel. How do you know it's an angel? Yeah, because they've got big wings. So angels are winged creatures who act as messengers. Sorry, I thought that was the post. Then here, this is a church near Clapham Junction Station. You can see a quote from the Bible. Jesus said, "I am the way." So these are all different ways in which we can show that a building is a Christian building. We've got a cross, we've got a mosaic with a picture of Jesus on it, we've got sculptures with angels on them, and we've got a Bible quote. Churches can be huge buildings, and normally if they're really big, they are called cathedrals, where a bishop sits. So a bishop is a person who's in charge of a large area of the church. They will be the main church for a large part of the country. So here is St Paul's Cathedral. That is the cathedral for London, north of the river. Here near us, we have Southwark Cathedral near Borough Market. That's the cathedral for London, south of the river. This here is, I want to say, York Minster in York, and that's a very important cathedral. That's where an archbishop sits, who's even higher up in the leaders in the church, and it's huge. It's absolutely massive. Lincoln has a beautiful cathedral, Canterbury has a cathedral, Norwich has a cathedral. Lots of cities in the UK have cathedrals. And then churches might also be very small, and they might serve just a small village or a single family. These are often called chapels. So you have a huge cathedral, churches that serve a local community, and then chapels which serve a small village or a single family. We're going to look at 3 different styles of churches, and these are called architectural styles. Architectural, okay, that's how you say that. Architectural, not architecture, even though it looks like that. If you sound it out, architecture. And architecture means the way that buildings are designed. The styles change over the years. Our school is a Victorian building. It's 200 something years old. It's a Victorian style of building. You might live in some flats that were built in the 1950s. They'll have a special architectural style. Or you might live in a Victorian house. Or you might live in a modern block of flats. The churches that we're looking at here are what are called Saxon churches, and they are the oldest churches in England. Christianity first came to England about 1,200 years ago, and these are some of the first churches that they were built. So how would you describe this style? I want you to tell me. Have a look at them. I'll be back in one sec. Just close the door there. So how would you describe these churches? Well, I think pretty plain and simple and straightforward. I think they're very old. I think they're quite small, because if you think over 1,000 years ago, not many people lived in Britain. The population wasn't as big as it was now, so they didn't need huge churches like they did later on. Plain, old, small, undecorated, plain stone. Those are some of the words that we might use to describe a Saxon church, a very, very old church. Now, this is a cool style. This is the Gothic style. So what we've got here is we've got Lincoln Cathedral. We've got, I should have labelled these when I made this. We've got Westminster Abbey and I want to say Canterbury Cathedral, but I might be wrong. Anyway, that's definitely Lincoln and Westminster Abbey. And so the Gothic style comes from about 600 to 400 years ago. And then it pops up again in the Victorian era. They sort of copied it again. Now, how would you describe this style? It's very, very different from the last style that we looked at. Well, here are some words that I thought are heavily decorated. Every inch of stone and design is decorated. Intricate, that means it's very detailed. Delicate almost, even though it's all made of stone, it looks like it's kind of almost like lace. It's lovely and delicate. Huge. Now, not all Gothic churches are huge, but this was a time when they were building lots of cathedrals, so they're massive churches. Pointy. I think that's fair enough. Look at all these points on here. If you go into any Gothic church, you'll see lots of pointy. And pointing up at what? Pointing up at the sky, at heaven, at God. So Gothic architecture always has a big, what's called vertical element to it. It's always looking up at the sky and at God. And very detailed indeed. So all of these have different small elements of carving. If you look, you can see some crosses. You can see some what are called trefoils, which are 3. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all represented here. These windows have 3 parts to them. These windows have 3 parts to them. These carvings here are 3 parts. You'll often see a lot of 3 in churches. And then finally, this is the last architectural style that we're going to look at. And this is called the modernist style. Now, this was common from the 1920s until the 1970s. So we're talking about 100 years ago to around about 60 years ago. You'll see lots of modern churches. So pause the video again. Tell me, how would you describe these churches? Modern. Okay, so they're new, they're recent. Stark. That means very different from what came before. Lots of concrete. They're quite plain. They're going a little bit back to these Saxon churches like this. They're almost returning to what church looked like in the past. Again, pointy. This cathedral here is Liverpool Roman Catholic Cathedral, and it points up at the sky. This church here is in South London somewhere. It points up at the sky. Square. This one here is very boxy and square and an unusual shape. So we've got 3 styles of architecture. Now, there are actually dozens of styles, but 3 styles that we looked at. Saxon, very old and very plain. Gothic, still old, but huge and pointy and detailed and intricate. And modernist, which is modern and stark and different and concrete. So those are the different architectural styles. Let's have a quick look at the booklet for today and see what it is that we have to do. So if you don't have the booklet yet, it is available on the website for you to do. You'll need to write your name on the front there. This picture on the front you might recognise, that's Southwark Cathedral. Now, Southwark Cathedral is a Gothic cathedral, so you can see it's pointy and it's decorated and it's all pointing up towards the sky. Okay, we've done that. We've drawn our picture of the church. And you've got your notes here. So why do all churches have tall elements like spires, towers and domes? You can read here again and that will tell you the answer to that. And then what kind of symbols do churches have on the outside? We'll have a read of this section again and this part of the slide, and that will tell you the answer to that. And then that's it for today. So those 2 bits of writing. If you want to finish your picture of the church, because you might not have spent very much time on it, then you can do that. And I'll see you next week. I hope you have a great week, guys. And we're going to look at some of the interior features, some of the features inside the church next week. Bye-bye.